Hello, Eugene. I'm looking forward to our conversation here this morning. And I thought I'd begin at the beginning by asking about when and why you became an artist. And I know everything written about you mentions the Joseph Beuys 1979 Guggenheim show catalogue and your reading of that, and it set up a notion of what modern art was and what an artist was. So could you just comment on that, Eugene?
Yes, Beuys was certainly the beginning of understanding what contemporary art was, as opposed to modern art. Before I discovered the wild and wacky world of contemporary art,
Yes.
I thought it was basically abstract painting.
Yes.
But now I know that's more than that.
Yes. In what ways more than that?
It involves drawing, performance, the connections from one point to another, sound.
Yeah.
Sculpture is not necessarily 3D. It's you can have thought sculpture, and that includes scale. An exhibition can be just a shadow or the way a light is placed in a room, and that was a wonderful revelation in terms of art practice.
Yeah. Eugene, there's a sort of urban myth in Brisbane that you used to talk to Joseph Beuys on the phone and did it a few times. Is that correct? And what was that about?
That is true.
Yes.
His phone number was in an international artist directory that was on the shelf at the IMA in Brisbane in 1986.
Yeah.
And I was looking through it one day, and sure enough, Joseph Beuys, phone number, address, and actually it was Peter Cripps that encouraged me to okay, you like this artist so much, talk to him, send him something.
Yeah.
And I wrote down the information, and I wasn't game to call him.
Yes.
I just wasn't.
Yes.
So I thought, look, I'll send him something.
Yeah.
And it was a small watercolour.
Yeah.
Like we're talking 10 centimetre. Just put it in an envelope, send it to the address.
Yeah.
And a few months later, I sort of got the courage to give this number a call.
Yes.
Phone rang, and he answers, yeah, it's Beuys.
Yes.
And I said, I'm not expecting anybody to answer, or at least an assistant or someone. And then I told him who I was and calling from Brisbane, Australia. He goes, oh, yeah, you sent me this watercolour, it was lovely. And, well, that was it. I was over the moon. I can't remember what he said after that. It was like, I was sort of in shock.
Yeah.
And, so it was important to know that this person was real.
Yeah.
These aren't just people in books that sort of majestically appear in an art bookstore.
Yeah.
So that was important.
And there's a sort of community, isn't there? So at that time, with the Joseph Beuys, there were a number of contemporary art spaces in Brisbane, like that, One Flat. Well, how significant were they to you?
Spaces.
Yeah, artist-run spaces, yeah.
Well, they were significant in the terms that you could make mistakes and no one would really care.
Yeah.
Or you could show work that was half-baked, but you wouldn't know that until you showed it.
Yeah.
And because we were sort of all in the same boat, there was this wonderful camaraderie.
Yes,
is that the right
that's
term?
the word.
And it sort of, we would give each other strength.
Yeah.
So, and it was through that, well, before that, Ray Hughes was pretty much the only contemporary art dealer. And through a process of all these artist-run spaces happening at the same time, there slowly or quickly emerged more galleries,
commercial galleries
that would show work. And there was Michael Milburn, Peter Bellis, of course, and when you're asked to be a part of the gallery, that was like a sign of confirmation.
Yes.
Or someone believed in what you were doing was
Yes.
important enough to show, and that was...
Yeah. The
That's how that
Institute of
happened.
Modern Art, you were in some of the shows, I think, when Peter Cripps was the director.
The
as
IMA
well.
was very important.
Yeah.
They picked up on the excitement of what was happening on a street level.
Yeah.
And then I guess gave it legitimacy. Not that I'm saying that that's what had to be done,
No.
but at the time it was important for all the artists in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned Bellis Gallery. I mean, how significant was that, your tying in with a commercial gallery at that time? I think your first show there was 1987. I think Bellis opened in 1986.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was everything, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Without Peter, I don't think there'd be quite a lot of artists that would probably still be washing dishes or being cleaners, or not that that's a bad thing.
No.
So, being incredibly naive, I didn't know what that meant.
Yes.
To have someone represent you. And now I do.
Yeah.
35 years later,
Yeah.
I'm here talking to you, Bob.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bellis Gallery became Milani Gallery, and you're
Yeah.
still showing there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in Melbourne, Sutton.
Sure.
Yeah.
All connections, sort of.
Yeah.
And also galleries from around Australia pick up on what's happening in cities, and gradually you get to show all over the place, and then, if you're lucky, a little bit of international.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll come to some of those in a bit. If we could just come to the nature of your work, Eugene, the sort of watercolours, and then I suppose the sort of constructivist sort of matchbox sculptures, for want of a better word, and installations, I know, as well. But could you just say something about those two kinds of work? And I know you do others, but those two kinds of work?
One informs the other, and there's also the sound aspect,
Yep.
which doesn't really get promoted that much. It depends on what I'm feeling on that day. Sometimes work has to be tactile.
Yeah.
I've just been in love with matchboxes,
Yes.
the fact that there's a space inside them, and they're like small rooms.
Yes.
And just by themselves, they're sculptural, architectural elements.
Yes.
I could easily I'd love to have a show with just nothing in them, just with light placement.
Yes.
The way shadows fall across them. And they can contain, I guess it's the way they contain energy,
Yeah.
I think is the only term that I can think of. I've used them in constructivist, with constructivist leanings, making them more sculptural. And also, the last batch that I did were pretty much using the spectrum, just having colour inside them. And the colour is transformed within the small space. And to me, it's an illusion. This small space is an illusion to a grander scale, I think. Because after all, with our thoughts, we create the world.
Yes. Yes.
Does that answer that part of it?
The watercolours then.
Oh, there's drawings, there's watercolours,
yeah.
there's even paintings.
Paintings, yeah.
Not so much painting, but but I just have to go with whatever is happening
Yeah.
in there that morning. And sometimes I follow a theme.
Yeah. Is there something in watercolour as the medium that's significant?
I think it's all to do with light.
Yes.
Watercolour transfers light. You can see through watercolour.
Yeah.
and it's the illusion of
Is it sort of transparency?
transparency, definitely, but it's ephemerality.
Yeah,
I think.
time.
And as we've been discussing prior to this, how time is nothing.
Yeah,
It's just disappeared.
yeah, yeah,
35 years doing this work, sitting in cross desk talking to people.
yeah,
Many friends have recently died,
yes,
so it's all part of that process.
yeah, yeah. You said, didn't you, everything takes time and time takes everything. And that's sort of what you're
That's
saying.
everything, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, the fleeting nature of all things.
yeah,
I guess that's why I like to use everyday materials like matchboxes.
yeah,
Yeah, how can I transform this into meaning?
yeah, yeah. So, Eugene, you've spoken yourself about the conceit of scale. What would you say about that in relation to both sets of works we've been talking about?
Well, like that lovely Buddhist quote, with our thoughts we create the world.
Yes.
It may think to an outsider that we're having this abstract discussion, but it's not really.
No.
It's, how did things get invented? Someone has an idea.
Yes, yes.
Then all
yes.
of a sudden, well, the internet.
Yeah.
That's a pretty conceptual thing.
yeah.
Yet it's such a real thing in everyone's life now.
Yes.
You can't imagine a world without it.
No.
So these are magical ideas, but they're real ideas, and they've appeared out of where? Out of nowhere. Just someone's inspiration.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm interested, and you said something about this in the sort of small, and I suppose the everyday, but link to something bigger. And I'm reminded when you've said that in the past of William Blake about holding infinity in the palm of your hand and a grain of sand. Yeah. So the sort of mundane everyday, but the sublime and the bigger. How does that work?
Well, that's the job of the artist, I guess, to put that across in one's work, hopefully.
Yeah.
Or at least that's one theme. I guess some artists don't work that way, but that's what rose my boat.
Yes, so to speak. What about the titles of the work? Often Museum of Silence, Museum of Hope.
Well, the museum part relates to the museum in everyone's house.
Yeah.
Everyone's home is their own personal museum, their collections.
Yeah.
And you visit someone and you work out who they are from their possessions or their placement of possessions.
Yeah.
These are all just small, everyday things that for me, sustains me.
Yeah.
That's the magic of everyday life.
Yes.
And without that, it will be a very unhappy existence.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Ursula Sikowski wrote a piece in Art and Text, and I mean, Art and Text was important at that time, wasn't it? As a different sort of art magazine at the time you were sort of beginning and building those early stages of your career. And reflecting on your work, she says Eugene Carchesio is an artist who primarily deals neither with poetry, I wondered, nor emotion, nor symbolic narrative, but directly with metaphysics, that is, with the problem of being.
Well, that's true and untrue at the same time, isn't it?
That's what I've always thought about the statement, yeah.
But I like that because, remember, there was someone said to me once, the opposite is also true.
Yeah.
And that's been one of those statements that's always been with me.
Yeah.
I can never look at anything in one direction
Yeah.
there's always two sides to every story.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. 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 It's like binaries, the way we come to understand something, don't we?
Opposites attract.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any more cliches I can throw in there?
Yeah, probably.
I'll think of another one.
So one of the things that also strikes me about your work, particularly the geometrical, mathematical, sort of almost scientific, is one way of understanding this world, but the other, the sort of spiritual. And I think you seem to work across both.
Well, like I said, you can never have one thing without the other.
Yeah.
I think patterns are important.
Yeah.
That's been a recurring theme throughout my practice.
Yeah.
And that pertains to this idea of connection.
Yeah.
What's that?
Sort of repetition.
Yeah, it's like a mantra, a visual mantra.
Yeah.
That you, it's a wonderful process.
Yes.
And I really have to be in that sort of frame of mind. And it's like a meditative thing.
Yes.
But depending on the day, you have to work with a certain colour.
Yes.
And that will refer to another colour.
Yeah.
And its relevance to what one's thinking at the time, maybe something you've seen on the news. I particularly like to work with this particular pattern. I don't know what it's called. I didn't invent it, but I first became aware of it when I was walking around all the cathedrals in my first trip to Europe.
Yes.
You're meant to sort of be looking at the glory of all these amazing paintings inside all these places, but I was sort of drawn to the patterns on the ground
Yeah.
and the people were walking over, and they were more relevant to me than the great works of art that you're supposed to be in awe of.
Yeah.
And that brings it down to everyday life again,
Yeah.
as opposed to being this great, the artist. Whereas it's just your job to look. You're just as important as the gardener or the chef or the mechanic. It's just that's what you do.
Eugene, you've lived for some time in some other places. So I know you had the Australia Council studio in Tokyo in Japan. And I know that you produced a beautiful set of works, particularly the leaves, which I think are in the Queensland Art Gallery. Could you say something about the impact of that artist residency in Japan?
Japan was, I think, 3 months living in a suburb of Tokyo called Takadanobaba. And it was just a one-bedroom apartment. So it really wasn't a studio as such, but there was a kitchen table.
Yeah.
And every day I'd go on these 12-hour walks through the city. And it was my first experience of living in a metropolis for any length of time. And I would visit all these galleries and amazing places. Yet I felt that that's pretty much the same in every city. Then I went to this particular art gallery and wasn't impressed with the work, which was supposed to be a very important sort of work. But I left sort of a bit deflated.
Yes.
And I looked down and I saw this dead leaf.
Yeah.
And this was early on in my residency. And spontaneously, I knew what I had to do for the next 3 months.
Yes.
And that was every day, during one of my walks, at the end of my walk, I'd find a leaf.
Yes.
And that would represent my snapshot of where I'd been for the day. And for the next few hours every night at the kitchen table, I would just be drawing this leaf and thinking about the day. And it was this process of my journey through that. And over the period, I sort of amassed about 20 odd watercolours.
Yeah.
And that was very it was very profound for me. And I'd never done that before,
Cool.
just sort of, just almost photographically
Reproduce
drew
them.
these. And I've started doing that again.
Yeah.
So maybe I get to a certain point that I need to get real again and just look at the process of. Also, I guess it's in view of the fact that the last year or two there's been a few deaths around, and that once again that fleeting nature of things, and just reminded what life is.
Yeah. And the leaves do that.
But there's this wonderful beauty, though.
Yeah.
In some leaves, as the decaying, the spots
Yes.
happen. The colours fade, yet part of the leaf is still has that energy of life, that green. And the more you look at something, the more there is to look at. And they're like these small universes.
So your family of Italian background, your mum's Sicilian, and you've visited Italy. I mean, does that background growing up in Brisbane, or the visits to Italy, how's that worked out for you in terms of your work?
Interesting question. It's not so much the Italian or European background. It's more this idea of, my mother was very Catholic. She comes from a small village in Sicily, and there, where all the old ladies are always dressed in black because they usually outlive their husbands.
Yeah.
But I grew up in this sort of, with my mother's myths, these ancient rituals, like if there was a storm coming, you'd get a handful of salt and you'd throw it out the window, and somehow that would protect you from the storm or the household. Things like that.
Yeah.
And these early Catholic, it was like performance art. For instance, on Ash Wednesday, you'd get the ash cross in your head. And in the 60s and 70s, you would see these people throughout the day with these sort of blurs on their heads. It's like, wow, this is really strange. And arcane practices.
Yeah.
Yet they're kind of relevant. They're imbued with meaning.
Yeah.
Also, during Lent, there would be this practice that Good Friday in a church, all the statues would be covered with purple cloth. And this was very strange to a child. And also, for that day, my mother would cover the mirrors, so you couldn't even see your own reflection, which meant, well, I'm not quite sure what that would mean, but you can sort of read psychological aspects of that. Well, meaning the day was so profound, you couldn't have vanity for that day to see, you just have to do without. These small things, yet very powerful when you think of them.
Yeah.
I don't know whether these practices still happen in contemporary Catholicism. I doubt it. But
do you think? I think they might.
Maybe in these little towns somewhere.
Yeah.
So it was more that rather than. To be honest, whenever I'd go to Italy, I didn't particularly like it. I preferred Switzerland or something like that. Scandinavian countries.
Germany.
Yeah. That's sort of more intellectual.
Yeah. Science and what have you. Eugene, you've done a lot of collaborations with other artists. I mean, the list, but I think of John Catapan, Madonna Staunton, Dale Harding more recently, and Gordon Bennett. And Gordon Bennett, of course, has the show on at the Queensland Art Gallery, Goma, at the moment. And I know in the newsletter for the gallery, you've written a little piece about your relationship with Gordon and working together. And I think it's interesting, coming back to what you said before, opposites attracting. You actually say in this piece that you and Gordon were opposites, and that he was diving into the mud of contemporary race politics, and you weren't. You say, though, that both of you trusted in the truth of art, but you say you would seek to transcend the everyday, the matter of fact. So in your reflection on Gordon, say some more about, maybe about Gordon, but about your work and the collaborations with him.
Well, once again, opposites attract. Well, these were in the early days. We were sort of starting out at pretty much at the same time. Although he was going through art college.
Eugene, you didn't go to art college. I know you studied architecture for a bit. I mean, is that significant? And in terms of, say, working with Gordon?
It was significant for me in that I was totally naive. Maybe still am. And proud of it. Whereas Gordon was very meticulous, would study. The grey area was his forte. Once again, things weren't black and weren't white. It was that grey area in between, which was very important for him, and he had to extract it. And it was great. It was like the yin and yang. I told you I'd come up with another cliche.
There you did.
What was the original question? Sorry, Bob.
Well, you say you're opposites, that he goes into the politics. And interestingly, you say you think that all of his work manifests a sort of rawness and a sort of hurt, really, in the production of his contemporary art.
It was his process of going through trauma. It was... there's this tension in all the work.
His performance works with the whips. I couldn't look at them. I thought,
well, that's just it. That was Gordon, and that's sort of, and maybe that was my dealing with his tension as well. Sort of pulling it up over here a bit, or sort of pulling it back down,
and adding angels and crosses. And
Well, that was interesting. He'd paint the black angels. Which of course he should. There's this wonderful, another big influence in my life has been this Afro-American musician called Sun Ra. Who supported a big band all his life. And that took some doing. And he always used to say about this positive, negative thing, well, in America they have the White House, but if you have a White House, you have to have a Black House. You can't have one without the other.
Interesting. On collaborations, like you and Gordon, opposites, what about with Madonna Staunton, who the notion of opposites doesn't seem as obvious, at least?
No. Well, every collaboration has its parameters. And we're friends, and there's nothing, it's like playing as adults. And poetry is important to me, and of course, it was everything to Madonna. And I love dabbling with the way another person works. Like I could use collage, which I normally don't use in my work. And it's a wonderful process to go through. And that's why I just love working with people. Because you might discover something that you do discover something that you may not have thought of. So it keeps one interested.
So what about the collaborations that are really quite recent in the last couple of years with Dale Harding?
Dale is such wonderful to work with. I see Dale's almost a shaman, the way he sort of treats materials.
Yeah.
He reminds me of Joseph Beuys in a way,
Yes.
or the latest works that he's been doing.
Particular resins from the earth, is that what?
Yes. Well, this particular pattern was made using he made me this pigment from ground hematite, which is ground earth, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I love that hematite is a Greek derivative from the word blood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just too obvious, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So Eugene, if we come to your music, and I know sometimes in your larger works, that piece, 187 pieces, the one that's in the convention centre, I know when that was first exhibited, your music was playing at the same time. What's the sort of relationship between your music and the kinds of improvisational music and your works on paper, sculptural work and so on?
Well, the improvising, I think, is the key point.
Yeah.
There isn't a direct relationship in that one thing is as important as another.
Yeah.
It's like saying, well, the other day you seem to be really enjoying your sandwich.
Yeah.
Therefore, you only ever eat sandwiches.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, life is a buffet of different things. Sometimes I have to, it's just a matter of expression.
Yeah.
Some days I just have to express myself with sound as well as music, because there's just two separate parts to that.
Yeah.
The sound sculpture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which once again just love the notion of just a sound work can be the work in a room, and you walk into a room, there's nothing there, just these vibrations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's that?
Yeah.
Isn't that, it's just a magical thing. So basically, one day I need to express myself with a drawing or a painting or writing even.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's interesting what you were saying about sound, because I think John Cage said that there's no such thing as silence. The sounds here. And it was interesting that he also said that Robert Rauschenberg's white paintings was some of the motivation for that work of his, silence, as it were. Yeah. But with you, it's the one person, the music and the...
Well, you can debate on an ethereal level that colour is vibration.
Yeah.
And essentially the two are connected, right?
You can.
It's family.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that sums that up.
Yeah. A part of the one sort of family. Yeah.
And sometimes one frustrates you one day and you get frustrated by something another day.
And do you record when you're always, or does some of it's just totally ephemeral? You've done this and it's gone.
Oh, this recording, especially if it's for a project.
Yeah.
So I do have an output for that. A friend of mine has a label called Room 40, and he puts out CDs.
Yeah. And I know you've worked with particular groups and so on, haven't you?
Yeah, once again, it's a system of collaboration.
Yeah.
And that's all it is.
Yeah. Eugene, you had this large show in 2008, Someone's Universe, the art of Eugene Carchesio, Queensland Art Gallery, 2008. I mean, how did that work, and how did you work in relation to that, and what's the sense of having such a substantial show at the State Gallery?
That's an odd one. It's kind of depressing in a way.
Yeah.
It's like, I really don't know. I guess I should be proud of it.
Yes.
Well, just seeing and that's only like 1/10 of
the work.
Of the work.
Yeah.
I purposely wasn't immersed in that. I just totally didn't want any control whatsoever. I wanted someone else to just curated.
So you left it to the curator, yeah.
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 So which, in retrospect, you think, oh, well, maybe if I had a little bit more control, more of this sort of aspect of the work could have been in it. But still, my hats off to the people who put it together. It was an amazing effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I think it would be too taxing if I got involved.
Yeah.
I think it's either you're hands-on or hands-off completely.
Yeah.
And I chose to...
Hands-off, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting thinking back to sort of one flat that, the early IMA and through to this, isn't it? The building.
That was like 10 years of stuff that didn't even get a look in.
Yeah.
So,
yes. Yeah. So Eugene, it would be good to talk about some of your work, and I have some here dating back to the earliest work at the time of those early 1980s Brisbane artist-run spaces. And I have this work, which I think has boys in the title somewhere, but I couldn't locate fully the title. But do you just want to say something about the work for us?
Well, I haven't seen this work in 40 years, so it's interesting. I have to remember what I was thinking at the time. Well, it comes straight out of the Joseph Beuys school of abstract minimalism.
Yes.
Dealing with the spirituality of animals. And he used to do these magnificent drawings of hares and deer, and they had their mythology
around that.
German mythology that he was using. And once again, I was trying to deal with the metaphysics of depicting life, and that is essentially a very quick idea. Also, it's sort of almost turning from that looks like a German fighter plane,
Yes.
a Messerschmitt or a Stuka or something like that, sort of evolving into a swan.
Yes.
So once again, the idea of maybe sort of depicting a cycle of rebirth.
Birth, yeah.
And from destruction to life.
Thanks. So the next work I have, Eugene, was from your first exhibition at a commercial gallery, the Bellis Gallery, 1987. You remember it?
Vaguely.
Would you say something about it, the composition? I mean, there's crosses, the cones.
Curiously, that still elements that I still use.
Yeah.
The diamond form. I don't know what's the term, architectonics?
Yes.
Is that a...
Yeah, that's, is it Malevich, I think.
I'm not quite sure what it refers
He
to.
made architectonics, he called them, those white sculptural pieces, I think, yeah.
Once again, the cross, sort of its relationship to religion, to life. Also, the cube is a symbol of strength for me. And I guess as an early artist, it's telling me that I really need to be strong about what I'm doing here. It's not a lightweight issue with me. Otherwise, it'll be a very short career.
Yeah.
Well, not that I ever thought of it as a career at the time.
No.
Every day was a blessing that I could make a living from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sort of some of the symbols refer back to Renaissance art. And once again, it's taking elements from things.
Yeah.
I enjoyed using the symbol of a cone as a metaphor for life. I used to marvel at how we're all made of exactly the same material. Blood, skin, bone, yet we all think differently.
Yes.
We all have different
Yeah.
methods of looking at things,
Yeah.
and why someone is a great gardener.
Yes.
Someone else has just a knack for being a mechanic, or and so forth. And the cone is a good metaphor for that, because if you use the cone from the small end, it amplifies energy. The other end, if you put it down, it becomes a filter. It focuses energy.
Yeah.
And that is pretty much my reason of being an artist, is working this out. With my energies lie, how I interpret energy, I think is probably the salient point.
And it's interesting, I mean, you wouldn't imagine, I think, if you looked at it, that it was more than 30 years old. Still seems to tie with many of the things you're doing. It looks very fresh, I think, It's a beautiful piece.
So much for the
ephemerality. I was thinking
of watercolour. Well, any piece of paper will outlive all of us, so...
Yeah. So the next piece is a collaboration with Madonna Staunton, and we sort of have talked about this, but is there anything else you...
Well, once again, it was a joy to sort of make a work that didn't have to look as if it was you that was making it. There's also this sort of idea that if you're an artist, you have to be recognised for your style. And maybe that's another good point of working with artists, collaborating. It's a freer mode of interpretation. And that's 1990, so that's 32 years ago. And I think that's a nice work, that it has a piece of...
You're not thinking of poetry.
There's a reference to music and
poetry, isn't it?
The half a circle reference to geometry, and there's Madonna's poetic collage. So it's a nice sort of mixture of both. Our sympathies, I guess. Both our sympathies are in this work.
And your work, if there is an artistic style, and her work seem to me to be beautifully complementary. And that sort of...
Well, there's that play of space.
And random,
placement.
but structured beautifully.
Definitely structure. You wouldn't think of it at first. The more you look at it, everything is placed where it should be.
Exactly. And I think that's interesting to me. The next work is a recent one, Eugene, and I know you've done a few of these. So it's a collaboration with Dale Harding.
This is, once again, a work of opposites in one respect, that Dale's using direct from nature. He used pigment from, I'm not sure whether that's hematite or whether he used the sap or mixed it in with the sap of a plant. And I've taken the opposite of the energy of the use of the colour silver as a reflection, and marrying it with a cutout of a colour scale from a cornflakes packet or something. So you think these two images wouldn't work, but they do.
They do,
And once again, it's sort of this tension that I think is important in any work.
Thank you. So the next work I have was from your most recent show at Milani Gallery.
This is called New Dawn Fades, which is taken from the lyrics from a Joy Division song.
Right.
And different colours, different tears over each, mistakes were made, I think. So the song's a fairly heavy sort of song, yet the work is light and energetic.
Very.
Once again, it's sort of this dealing of opposites attracting, and I think it's got all my elements in it.
It does.
Symbolism, pattern, and once again, colour being the dynamism of colour, the vibration of the different colours where they meet. I think is the point of this work.
I mean, and it looks beautiful as a piece, doesn't it?
Oh, it's all right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far.
I would, Thanks very much for this chat about your work, Eugene. And maybe as a way of ending, what are you actually working on right now? And how does it link to what we've been talking about?
Just more of the same, Bob.
More of the same, okay. And that would be great from my perspective. So thanks, Eugene.
Thank you.
Thank you.